Hey, it's John Clay, your chief host and chief strategy guide, and welcome to another session of Benefits with John Clay. Last week, I highlighted the annual inflation rate, which is the highest since 1981 at 9.1% for June of 2022. This week, you're a CEO under fire. And once again, I want to welcome you to the show. A quick shout out to our sponsor, none other than Better Source Benefits, Benefits Options Solutions. Check it out at www.bettersourcebenefits.com. So inflation surged 9.1% in June, the most since November of 81. Today, a major investor is on line one, CNN is on line two, and social media is exploding in anger. What are you going to do about it? When you're a CEO under fire, the next few moments can be an incredible opportunity, or they can destroy your career. And in the past, companies have had preparation for crises and expensive, static crisis communication plans. The pace was slower. You had time to process. You had a plan to respond. You had a team of lawyers and your senior management. But hey, those old school tactics and plans don't work anymore. Today, managing a crisis is all about speed. And with a 24-hour news cycle and social media mobs, if you're not controlling your message by lunch, you could be convicted in the court of public opinion by dinner. And speed kills careers. So let's break it down for you here. We're going to talk a little bit about what the top CEOs in the country are looking forward to in Q2. And their survey says that they use a conference board measure of CEO confidence. And this measure is a barometer of the health of the U.S. economy from the perspective of U.S. chief executives. The measure of CEO confidence is based on those perceptions that of current and expected business trends and industry conditions. This survey also gauges CEOs' expectations about future actions their companies intend to take. And we're talking about four key areas: capital spending, employment, recruiting, and wages. Big issues that are always on the front burner of any CEO's docket. So here we go. What are the current conditions? CEO's assessment of the general economic conditions declined in Q2 of this year. 14% of CEOs have reported economic conditions that were better than 6 months ago, but that's down 34% from 34% in first quarter. So 61% of these CEOs said conditions are worse, which is an increase of worse condition forecast by 35%. So the CEOs are more pessimistic about conditions in their own industries as well. And 24% of those CEOs are saying that conditions in their industries are better. And that's only, it's down 40% from the prior quarter. So you're seeing a trend downward. And 37% said conditions in their own industries were worse, which is up 22%. So it's headed in that direction, folks. There's a waning of enthusiasm in industry. So let's take it to the next level. What about future conditions? So the CEO's expectations about short-term economic outlook weakened in Q2 as well. Down 50%, only 19% of CEOs said they expected economics to improve over the next 6 months. And up from 23%, 60% expected conditions to worsen. So the short-term prospects in their own industries, same kind of thing. They're expecting the conditions in their own industries, only 28% expect them to improve, which is down from 58% in first quarter. That's a pretty stark contrast. There, 58% of CEOs in first quarter are saying, hey, conditions are good, and now only 28% are saying they're favorable going forward. That's not good. And likewise, 13% expected conditions to worsen in their own industry. Now that's up to 34%. And then, boom, we start right into the we start right into a CEO's expectations of recruitment, wages, and capital spending. You know, if you're going to spend capital projects, you got to staff them with employees, and you got to recruit those employees to get them in the door to get that capital expense working for you. So employment, 66% expected to expand their business and their employment in the first quarter. Now that's 63%. Not a big drop, but some. And a bit more favorable in hiring qualified people. There are 80% of CEOs report some problems attracting qualified workers, which is only down from 83% in Q1. So they seem to be finding employees to put into those roles. But the report here is that 61% report difficulties that cut across the organization rather than concentrate in a few key areas. And, that is the bellwether of what we can expect for hiring. Wages are going to have to go up. 91% of CEOs expect to increase wages by 3% or more over the next year. In comparison to the first quarter, we're only 85%. So you're seeing that trend upward. And then, boom, the less capital spending. The projects are on hold. 41% said they were going to increase their capital budgets in first quarter. Now that figure is 38% of CEOs. So the capital projects are kind of seeing a slowdown. And, shout out to last week's show on inflation. What's the most likely outcome of this Federal Reserve money tightening policy? And the survey says that 60% of CEOs expect inflation will come down over the next few years. But the U.S. will have a very short, mild recession, which the Fed offsets and reverse soft landing. But here are the folks that are really thinking that 11% foresee a challenging recession. 20% said inflation will stay elevated for the next few years and U.S. growth will slow significantly. And we're talking that situation is called stagflation. And stagflation is like a 40-year-old can of insecticide coming back to haunt you, because that's what we had back in the 80s. So throwback to the old school recession programs and inflation of the 80s. Facing these new challenges, how are CEOs managing input and labor costs? So input, is just your raw materials that go through a process to come out as finished goods. And more than half, 54% of the CEOs said they're effectively managing these rising input costs. How do they do it? They pass those costs on to customers. Boom. 13% said they had no major issues with input costs. But there's your inflation factor creeping into the supply chain, if you will, of these manufacturing concerns. Input costs going up, and they're passing them straight on to the consumer. Not a good sign for those that are consuming, right? And more than 2/3 of the CEOs said they're increasing wages across the board in response to labor market conditions and managing these rising labor costs through different means. They're finding ways to pull levers and use fulcrums to help alleviate the pressure on their business that the higher wages are demanding. And we say that benefits offer these key levers to throw in this solution. So, how are CEOs planning to respond over the longer term to avoid future supply chain disruptions? So, that's the big issue, right? Supply chain has been all we've heard about for the last 6 months. That has cost everybody from uh, baby formula, right, to supply chain issues with the chips in cars. Almost half of all the CEOs said they are diversifying their global source countries, but cannot use solely US, Mexico, Canada sources. An additional 35% said they're not experiencing any significant disruptions. Well, that's still half the country is experiencing supply chain issues, and they're trying to find an alternate source for their materials. So, what's the takeaway? CEOs are looking for insights to lead their organizations through situations in business. Our goal is to share a plain spoken wake up call for company leaders, CEOs, or anyone with a brand to protect when things go very bad. At Benefits with John Clay, we're about solutions and strategies in the bare knuckle brawl that is the employee acquisition and retention crisis and the coming downturn. A well designed benefit strategy can arm yourself with wisdom in the series of shows. And stay tuned, because using levers and fulcrums to make simple yet impactful adjustments, you'll be likely or more likely to survive with your company and your reputation intact. So I invite you to click on the website at www.bettersourcebenefits.com and click on the Get Started link to book a brief web meeting with me, John Clay, your host and chief strategy guide. So that's it for today. I hope this has been informative and gives you some confidence in winning as a CEO under fire. Join us next week, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, on Benefits with John Clay.